Good evening, everybody. Jess here, Wild and Raw Wellness. Also the Holistic Frugivore, but I can't go live over there right now, so I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna give a little bit to see if anybody wants to hop on. I like get a little more interaction in these lives, as I'm gonna start to go a little deeper. I'm feeling drawn to go deeper because that is what, humanity really needs right now. And as this is a page that I really dedicated to motherhood, conscious parenting, unschooling, natural healing, and kind of into the spirituality and shadow work, I feel like this is a really good place to get into these depths. So this is probably going to be one of the harder lives I've done, or videos altogether, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about personal experiences. Not in detail, but, a little bit. I'm not one who likes to talk about myself really ever, or vulnerability. That's terrifying to me. Even in relationships, family, even in friendships, I've historically always pushed people away before it got too vulnerable. If you're a friend, a family, someone I've dated, which isn't very many, you could probably attest to that or see that. And it's not something I consciously understood, the connection to traumas, until recently. So the point that I wanted to make in this video, and what we're going to talk about a little bit, is how hugely impactful childhood traumas are to the development of the self into adulthood. How so much of our childhood is very defining toward how we will become in our adult life. And as I've journeyed into my own shadow work, into chakra work with yoga and meditation, getting into shamanism, healing medicines, even within the nutritional detoxes and direction I've gone, it all goes back to trauma, and more specifically childhood trauma. So this is a book that I have on the chakras, and I want to make a couple little points here first in terms of the chakras. So the root chakra is your right to be here and to have, basically about your physical self. Being here, being rooted, health, home, family, finances. And it develops around the developmental stage at which your root chakra really forms is within the second trimester in the womb up until a year old. So think about that. The experiences that you have from the second trimester of when you are in your mother's womb up until a year old, that is when the most development of the root chakra takes place. Okay? So any type of experiences you have over that time will impact the energetics of your chakra. And imbalances of it show up with kind of an ungroundingness of the self, disconnection of the self, fearful, anxious, restless, poor focus, difficulty with finances, poor boundaries, a lot of issues around eating, obesity, overeating, and undereating, lazy, tired, and fear of change, addiction to security. And those are, as you get older, that's the things that manifest when we haven't dealt with these chakras. Got the sun shining on me right now. When the unhealed traumas. So when the traumas that have happened to you do not get acknowledged or worked through because there is a lack of awareness of the parenting or guardian of you in that stage. There's an unacknowledgement. And that energy, that shows how powerful energy is, up to a year old, begins to suppress within that chakra, manifest within those areas energetically. And physically, those show up as bowel issues, can be within bones and teeth, eating disorders, and frequent illness. So now let's look at the second chakra, which is the sacral. This is probably the biggest one that impacts humanity right now. Why? Because the sacral chakra is related to sexual traumas, physical abuses, and on a planetary scale, the abuse around sexuality and sensuality, suppression of those things among women, the abuses of children, those all are things that affect the sacral chakra. And this is our area of feeling and to have pleasure. So there's so much trauma around our sexuality, sensuality, and it relates to creative flow as well. And this develops, the second chakra develops between 6 and 24 months. So again, just a baby. And think about how many children are abused. And as parents, I am going to call you out and tell you that so much of our parenting style that we have been conditioned to accept as normal is abuse. Emotional neglect, which is what I dealt with myself. Not necessarily at this stage. I haven't fully resonated with that. But sexual abuse to young children, emotional abuse, neglect, rejection. Neglect and rejection. What happens to babies between 6 and 24 months that creates neglect, coldness, and rejection? Cry it out. Stop it. Stop forcing your children to self-soothe. You are creating a trauma. Okay? Babies aren't capable of putting themselves to sleep. They need comfort. They need emotional and physical comfort from a loving parent. Literally holding your child is sharing your love energy from your heart chakra. You are literally sharing your love simply by being next to your child. You're sharing your frequency with them, your energy. By forcing them to lie alone and cry, that's denying their feelings. That's the next one. Denial of child's feelings, lack of mirroring, and emotional manipulation also falls in that category. You are manipulating them to fall asleep by ignoring their emotions. Overuse of playpen or restricting normal movement, religious or moral severity, that often comes in not talking about sex with children or just telling them to abstain and never actually talking about that. Physical abuse and alcoholic in the family. And then inherited issues. This is where generational it comes back really bad. We have a lot of generational traumas that carry down with each chakra. But I don't want to go too far into the chakras. I just wanted to talk about the ages, because I don't want to go that far. So the third chakra is our ability to act and be. This is our individuality and self-power. 18 months to 4 years old. And when this isn't developed properly, there's so much shame, self-esteem issues, avoidance of dealing with conflict. And this is where the ego identity comes up as well. This is where we really build our sense of self, is within that solar plexus. Now the fourth is the heart chakra. And this is obviously to love and be loved. And it's developed within ages 4 to 7. So that is where our children really need us the most. And that's often where they're the most difficult. It's because they're challenging our boundaries a lot. Almost like they're challenging you as the parent to see whether you're still going to be there for them. No matter how much they do to try to test boundaries, will you still be there supporting them by their side? Not constantly pushing them away, locking them in their rooms, timeouts, forcing them to sit in their own emotions alone. And again, the traumas that come up in this area are rejection and abandonment, shaming, constant criticism, unacknowledged grief, divorce, conditional love, of course, the reward and punishment. We need to just stop all of that when it comes to our children. Your acceptance of them should have nothing to do with conditions. And when we do it based on behavior, it teaches children to act according to what's accepted from someone else. And it doesn't allow them to flourish in their own true authenticity. It's always seeking that acceptance of a authoritarian figure in order to get ahead and be seen. It has to do more with being seen. Seek that acceptance to be seen by someone that you want to love you. The fifth chakra. Come on. That is our throat. And that is the ability to speak and hear the truth. So this is your freedom of expression and your ability to listen and communicate. That's both ways. Being able to listen and truly communicate, consider others, and also speaking for yourself. It's not just about speaking loudly so that everyone hears you. You also need to be able to reciprocate and hear others. And often that's where that dynamic gets thrown off with parents, because often parents think, I need to be heard because I'm the parent and I'm going to tell you what to do. And you don't consider your children, how they feel in a situation, what's causing them to be in a certain space, emotionally, energetically, and they're not always able to communicate what that means in words for an adult to understand, or to be able to actually verbally communicate how they're feeling. So literally just sit there with them. You're there. Just let them know that you are there. If they're ready to talk to you, when they want to talk to you, or just know that you're there, lovingly supporting them in their experience. And this chakra develops between 7 and 12. So this is where our children are really moving into more of an independent space. And as a parent, we need to respect that space, not be so, needing the control over your children, or to force them into a bubble of expectations that we have for them, and not allow them to freely express themselves. All right, so let's go on to the sixth chakra, which is the third eye. And I've spoken to this one before in terms of how the third eye often starts to be suppressed as our children get older, because we, again, don't always nurture that part, it ends up being suppressed by society and the conditioned normalcy of how we run society, and the conditioned acceptance among groups and cultures or whatever that don't allow these kind of psychic, intuitive gifts that we all innately have. We don't allow those to flourish because we're so uneducated or not knowledgeable, because our abilities were suppressed as children. So we don't even know how to speak to it half the time. I'm 34 and I only now am beginning to understand this role of energy and intuition and opening the third eye to our psychic gifts and our connection to consciousness and speaking to past loved ones and being able to open that realm and being able to speak to that for our children allows them to understand what's going on in their world, because they are naturally open. They are very astrally open. And that slowly gets closed over time as long as we don't nurture that part of them and allow that to flourish. So this develops most over adolescence, just through their entire adolescence. That's all I'm going to kind of say about that one. And the last is the crown. And this is the area that really takes the most to develop for us. And that's early adulthood and after, because it's really that transcendence, that higher power, that divinity that we come into connection with. And the true stepping into the crown chakra comes with our dealing with traumas. So I'm glad that kind of naturally circled around. So coming out of the crown, we're going to come back to what I originally wanted to talk about, is how traumas, mostly childhood traumas like we just touched on, really are so defining to what we become in adulthood. And this all kind of came up to me so much recently because there's a show that I watched called Intervention. And it's on like season 21 or something, so 22, something like that. And I've literally watched every season, every episode. I've been very obsessed with this show. And I've learned so much over that time. And the one thing that connects every single one of these addicts is a trauma. Addicts don't choose to be an addict. It's not a disease in itself. Addiction is not a disease. Addiction is what unhealed traumas lead to because they're not dealt with. And they can often stack on top of each other, too. It can be like one significant trauma that just manifests in someone and it doesn't go away, and it takes over every part of them. And the addiction numbs it. That's what whatever you reach for in your addiction, whether that be alcohol, any kind of drug, even, food, sex, you can really technically be addicted. Exercise is one too. You can become addicted to really anything. It's not just drugs. It's something that you reach for when you feel overwhelmed or in need of numbing certain emotions. Something is very uncomfortable coming up and you feel too vulnerable or hurt or triggered, and you reach for something to numb it. That is really where addiction comes from. And I speak from a personal sense because I did this through college. And alcohol was what I reached for. And it's normalized through college because it's like, yeah, everyone drinks, not a big deal, go party. Yes and no. Like, yes, have fun, enjoy your time. But there's that point to where it becomes, again, numbing your life. When you're reaching for it to numb aspects of your life, whatever it is you're reaching for, that is an addiction. And that comes around to the food addictions as well, the addictive food behaviors that I talk about on my Holistic Frugivore page when it comes to nutritional aspects. Another thing that I can say I personally deal with. Feeling overwhelmed. Women very often deal with this during their cycles, or they're emotional or anxious or whatever it is, and you reach for food because it makes you feel better. Except it doesn't. It's mental. Like physically, that food doesn't actually make you feel better. It's mentally numbing something. You're feeding an addiction. Very literally. So these childhood traumas often get thrown under the rug, unacknowledged. You know, the main ones are abuses, abandonment. There's codependent behaviors, like you seek for, with partners, this is where you see it the most in relationships. The dynamic of a relationship, when your relationship starts, you're actually seeking a partner that is familiar when it's related to the traumas of your childhood. So it's fitting into your trauma. It's the same type of thing of addiction. This partner, usually someone who is emotionally or physically abusive, we'll say that, it fits into your trauma. If you didn't have a trauma around an abusive individual, that individual wouldn't be attractive to you, and you wouldn't attract them to you. So it's easy when we are in a relationship with someone who is abusive, in whatever way you want to say it. I've been there. I've had a partner who was abusive. And it's easy to project blame onto that person, but truly, that individual is a shadow of your trauma. That person in themselves has their own traumas to deal with that has brought them to the role that they are playing now. But not only that, they are a shadow for you of inner work that you need to do, because they are feeding a direct trauma for you. So once you heal through your traumas, which can be as simple as meditating into an experience that you've had when you were younger and intending to let go of the pain of that experience. Cutting the cord of that experience and not allowing it to run your life anymore. Because unconsciously, it could be consciously, but usually it's an unconscious fuel for you of how you live and behave. So being able to consciously cut that trauma out, release it into the ethers, will change not only your relationship to yourself, because that's what emits outward to attract a partner, is your soul frequency. So it's easy for us to project outward at a partner as being terrible or narcissistic or abusive. But you were attracted to that person, and that person came into your life because it was based off of your own soul frequency. And it has to do with a certain amount of karmic work that you had to do in this life. It seems crazy that we have to go through these abuses in order to heal abuses and traumas. But that's really how it works. Those are how your lessons get learned. We won't ever get through a human life without dealing with some sort of trauma. No one. Not one person on this planet is here without trauma or karmas.
We're here to learn lessons from those traumas and even karmic cycles from past lives that resurface. An example would be one for myself that came into me in a shamanic session, healing session, was a past life of being burned at the stake for being a witch. And this is a common, very common one for a lot of women, because historically, many women were burned at the stake simply for being witches. Why? Here's an interesting thing about that I came to as well. Why were witches burned at the stake? Truly, because the powerful connection that witches hold with Mother Nature and our spirit source consciousness, and the ability to harness those energies, is a direct threat to our control powers. Those powers that control society. And that's been for millennia. So those control powers continue to suppress and murder the populations that are the greatest threat to their power. And it's still happening today. If you just look around the world and see how things play out in wars, all of it. And that's part of our journey. It's part of the journey of being human. But the hardest part actually, is that so many humans will go through a great part of their life without much or any reflection on their traumas, because it's easier to ignore them or numb them. And that's where the addictions come up. That's where we see such an immense amount of addiction, even all of the obesity and food-related illnesses, chronic dieting to lose weight, all that stuff has so much to do with a desire to be accepted, or a desire for someone to see you, or for you. I would actually say that's more of an internal battle of a struggle for your own self-worth and self-love. I made that realization the other day that if you continue to do things that you know aren't good for you, whether that be drinking drugs, eating foods that aren't good for you, if you continue to do those things, consciously understanding that they aren't good for your body, then you are telling yourself that you aren't worth it, that you're not worth making better choices, or it's a form of self-sabotage. So I'm going to end this. This already ended up to be a little bit longer than I planned, but I wanted to make it nice and thorough. I did want to touch a little bit on my own. I'm not good at being vulnerable. But the reason I relate to those intervention stories so much is because I feel myself in a lot of them. And I was watching it tonight, and literally the emotion that comes up for me now is I wish I could just give that person a hug, the person that's struggling on that show, and tell them that they're loved and that they're worth it. Because that's all I needed. So that's what I'm going to end with tonight. You are loved, and you are worth it.